What if the loudest message was silence itself? In an age where every emotion is streamed, every tear is shared, and every tragedy becomes a headline, one family dared to do the impossible. They said nothing. Weeks after the shocking tragedy in Utah that stunned the nation, the world waited for a statement from the family of Charlie Kirk, the famous activist and founder of Turning Point USA. But instead of words, there was only quiet. Then one day, cameras at the White House caught a glimpse of them. Two figures dressed in black, standing side by side, motionless. That single image reignited a storm of curiosity. Who were these people who raised one of America's most outspoken voices, yet refused to speak when it mattered most? What were they protecting? And what truth hides behind their silence? Tonight, we uncover the story the media couldn't tell. A story not about politics or fame, but about love, loss, and the quiet power of dignity. From the suburbs of Illinois to the Rose Garden of the White House, this is the hidden world of Robert and Katherine Kirk, the parents who built a life of structure and empathy, only to see it tested by the noise of a nation. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Inside the Billionaires, hit the like button, and stay until the end. Because what you're about to see isn't just about one family. It's about what happens when silence becomes stronger than any speech. Because somewhere inside that silence lies the truth America wasn't ready to hear. Utah, September 10th, 2025. What began as an ordinary morning turned into breaking news that froze an entire nation. The name Charlie Kirk flashed across every screen, not for a speech, not for a rally, but for something far darker. Within minutes, social media erupted. Hashtags, live streams, speculation, chaos. In every corner of America, people were asking the same question. How could this happen? Charlie wasn't just another public figure. To millions, he was a movement, a symbol of conviction, energy, and defiance. The founder of Turning Point USA, a man who built his brand on boldness, on never backing down. And now, the country that once debated his every word stood in collective disbelief. News helicopters hovered above Utah Valley University, reporters filled the screens with half-truths and breaking updates, while analysts rushed to define what this meant for the nation's political divide. But through all the noise, one thing stood out: the deafening silence from his family. No statement, no appearance, not a single word from Robert and Katherine Kirk, the parents of the man America couldn't stop talking about. Their home in Glendale remained quiet, curtains drawn, lights off. As the media scrambled for a reaction, the Kirks stayed invisible, calm in a world desperate for answers. And that silence became the story itself. Some called it denial, others called it dignity. But to those who knew them, it was something deeper, a shield. The only form of control left in a moment where everything else had been taken away. Because when the world gathered to say goodbye at a massive memorial, two silent figures would finally step into the light. And without saying a single word, capture every heart in the room. And when the world gathered to say goodbye, two silent figures finally stepped into the light. It was September 21st, 2025. The air thick with grief and anticipation inside State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Thousands filled the stands, from political leaders to loyal supporters, from curious onlookers to those who had simply come to witness history. Bright lights cut through the silence, illuminating a massive stage draped in the colors of the American flag. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. Every face seemed to wait for the next headline moment. Then quietly, without escort or fanfare, they appeared. Robert and Katherine Kirk. No security detail, no press statement. Just two parents walking side by side through the crowd. They didn't sit in the front row where the politicians gathered. They chose the shadows in the back, away from the spotlight, as if trying to shrink inside their own grief. When speeches began, names echoed through the stadium. Senators, governors, allies, each offering praise and promises to continue Charlie's mission. But the parents said nothing. No tears in public, no message for the cameras, only stillness. Observers couldn't look away. In a hall full of voices, their silence was the loudest sound. It wasn't weakness, it was intention, a quiet, deliberate act of control. And as the crowd rose for the final tribute, a sea of hands over hearts, the Kirks didn't stand to address the world. they simply bowed their heads and held each other's hands. That single moment, two figures motionless amid thousands, spoke louder than every eulogy combined. It wasn't a retreat from pain, it was dignity in its purest form, unshaken, unspoken. But as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, one question lingered in every heart. If silence could move an entire stadium, what were the Kirks truly trying to say? The memorial ended, but the silence didn't. Just days later, another grand tribute was announced, this time hosted by Turning Point USA, the very movement Charlie had built from scratch. The lineup was staggering. Former President Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, top conservative voices, and thousands of loyal supporters ready to celebrate the legacy of a man they saw as a hero. Every camera in America was pointed toward Phoenix. Every news desk waited for one moment, the return of Charlie's parents. People expected tears, closure, maybe even a message of gratitude. But when the event began, their seats were empty. Robert and Katherine Kirk never came. No public appearance, no message, no wreath, no confirmation they were even in the city. It was as if they had vanished completely, retreating into a private world where headlines couldn't reach them. And that absence became louder than any speech on stage. Commentators filled the silence with speculation. Was it grief, disagreement, protest? But those who knew the Kirks understood. This was no accident. It was precision. The same precision Robert used to build skyscrapers now turned towards something far more fragile, the boundaries of his family's privacy. They understood that once pain becomes public, it stops belonging to you. So instead of stepping into the circus of cameras and commentary, they built an invisible wall of quiet around their lives, a wall no journalist could break. In an age where grief is marketed and tragedy is monetized, the Kirks refused to turn sorrow into spectacle. They didn't want to control a narrative, they wanted to protect a memory. But as the nation debated their silence, one question started to grow louder than ever. Who exactly were these people? Who could disappear so completely, yet still command the world's attention? Before the lights, before the chaos, before the name Kirk became a headline, there was just a small, quiet house in Prospect Heights, Illinois. A modest suburb northwest of Chicago, where weekends meant barbecues with neighbors, and the loudest sound on a Sunday was the church bell echoing down the street. That's where Robert and Katherine Kirk built their world. Robert, a disciplined architect, known not for fame, but for precision. His colleagues said he designed like he lived, measured, deliberate, never rushed. His blueprints helped shape part of Chicago's skyline, including work connected to Trump Tower, New York, but to him, the real masterpiece was the family he built at home. Katherine, calm, soft-spoken, yet deeply intuitive, was a counselor who helped others rebuild the parts of themselves that life had broken. She spent her days listening to strangers' pain and her nights ensuring her own family never felt it. Together they lived by simple codes: work hard, stay kind, keep faith. Theirs was a household of books, not headlines, conversations, not confrontations. At dinner, talk revolved around architecture, psychology, and community, not politics or fame. Friends remembered them as the type of family who waved to every neighbor, even the ones who never waved back. To outsiders, they were ordinary. To those who knew them, they were rare, a pair of quiet souls who believed that real strength wasn't loud or forceful, but steady and consistent. But destiny doesn't always respect quiet lives, because inside that peaceful home, a restless young boy was beginning to dream, not of blueprints or therapy sessions, but of microphones and crowds, of ideas that could divide or unite a nation. And soon, the quiet streets of Prospect Heights would give birth to one of the loudest voices in modern America. From the outside, the Kirk household looked perfectly ordinary. But inside that quiet home in Prospect Heights, something was stirring, a spark that no one, not even Robert or Katherine, could have predicted. Charlie Kirk was curious, restless, and endlessly talkative. While other kids played video games, he was glued to talk radio, fascinated by voices like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, men who spoke with confidence and conviction. To a teenage mind craving direction, that certainty felt like truth. At first, his parents thought it was just a phase, a boy exploring ideas. But those ideas soon became his identity. By high school, Charlie was debating teachers, questioning authority, and writing about what he called America's moral decline. He didn't just want to talk, he wanted to change minds. Robert admired his son's ambition, but worried about the fire behind it. He was a builder, a man who solved problems with patience and calculation. Charlie, on the other hand, built movements. Fast, loud, unfiltered. Katherine tried to be the bridge. She taught him empathy, reminded him that every argument has a human heart behind it. But the world outside their home rewarded the opposite: speed, certainty, confrontation. By 19, Charlie was giving speeches, appearing on TV, and founding Turning Point USA, a political movement aimed at reshaping how young Americans saw their country. His rise was meteoric. His words divided the nation. His fame grew faster than even he could manage. And through it all, his parents watched quietly from the background, proud, cautious, and slightly heartbroken. Because the louder his world became, the quieter theirs had to be. And as Charlie's face appeared on screens across the country, Robert and Katherine began to realize something profound. They hadn't just raised a son, they had unleashed a storm. Inside the Kirk home, two worlds quietly coexisted, one built on precision, the other on passion. Robert Kirk, the architect, believed every problem could be solved by structure, patience, and design. Katherine Kirk, the counselor, believed that healing required understanding, empathy, and grace. They built their lives on balance, the kind that comes from faith, reason, and listening before speaking. And then there was Charlie, their only son, whose gift was not silence, but volume. He didn't build walls, he broke them. He didn't seek understanding, he sought conviction. While his father drafted blueprints for buildings, Charlie drew blueprints for movements. Dinner conversations shifted over the years. What once centered on architecture and psychology became debates about morality, freedom, and truth. Robert would pause, measure his words, while Charlie spoke like a man racing time. Katherine would listen in silence, her hands folded, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. To outsiders, they were the perfect family, disciplined, loving, successful. But within those walls was a quiet tension that only love can contain. The eternal clash between order and chaos, between the world that creates and the world that argues. Robert believed stability was the foundation of greatness. Charlie believed disruption was, and Katherine stood in between, the bridge between two philosophies, watching the space between them widen with every new speech, every new headline, every cheer from a crowd that once belonged to their living room. Yet despite their differences, the Kirks never stopped loving their son. They didn't agree with his methods, but they respected his courage. They didn't share his spotlight, but they protected his name. Still, as Charlie's voice grew louder, the family's silence deepened, until it became not just a habit, but a shield. And one day, that silence would be all they had left. After the Utah tragedy, America demanded answers. Cameras camped outside the Kirk residence in Glendale. Helicopters hovered overhead. News vans lined the street, their lights flickering against the family's drawn curtains. But behind those curtains, there was nothing but stillness. No interviews, no statements, no appearances. Just Robert and Katherine sitting side by side at their kitchen table. Two people who had lost a son and gained a nation's gaze they never wanted. Neighbors said they hardly saw them leave the house. Even mail piled up untouched. The world outside screamed for details, while the world inside whispered only prayers. Reporters speculated endlessly. Were they hiding? Were they angry? Were they ashamed? But those who knew them best understood. This wasn't avoidance. It was intention. Robert, the architect who once built towers of steel, now built invisible walls, boundaries of silence, to protect the last thing they still owned, their peace. Katherine, the healer, transformed her understanding of pain into quiet endurance. Instead of trying to explain, she listened, not to others but to grief itself. Their silence became a language, precise, deliberate, unbreakable. In a world where every emotion is shared and every loss is monetized, They refused to turn their son's death into a public performance. They understood something most had forgotten, that once pain becomes content, it stops belonging to you. Friends called it strength, critics called it mystery, but maybe it was both. The silent architecture of dignity, designed to hold up against the crushing weight of public opinion. They didn't want to rewrite Charlie's story. They wanted to preserve it, unedited, unexploited, untold by anyone but memory itself. And so, while politicians gave speeches and movements carried on in his name, the Kirks stayed hidden in plain sight. Architects not of fame, but of restraint. Because in a world built on noise, their silence became their greatest masterpiece. And soon, that silence would follow them, all the way to the White House. October 14th, 2025. The White House Rose Garden bathed in soft afternoon light. Rows of white chairs lined the manicured lawn. The crowd stood still as a familiar hymn filled the air. Amazing Grace. At the center of it all stood Robert and Katherine Kirk. Dressed in black, hands clasped, faces pale but composed. It was their first public appearance since the tragedy, and the weight of that moment hung in the air like a held breath. Beside them stood Erica Kirk, tears glistening in her eyes as President Trump stepped forward to present the Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor, awarded posthumously to Charlie Kirk. As the medal gleamed under the sunlight, cameras flashed from every angle. Reporters whispered, waiting for an emotional breakdown, a statement, a gesture, something. But the Kirks gave them nothing. No words, no interviews, not even a glance toward the press. Robert looked straight ahead, his jaw set, his tie trembling slightly in the breeze. Katherine's hands pressed against her chest, her expression unreadable, neither anger nor sorrow, only an ache too deep for display. The applause roared across the garden, echoing through the marble walls of the White House. Yet amid the cheers and the music, the Kirks remained perfectly still, two statues carved from love and loss. And when the ceremony ended, they turned away quietly. No press conference, no statement, only silence. Because for them, this wasn't about recognition, it wasn't about legacy, it was about closure. Or at least the closest thing to it. That day, as the nation celebrated, two parents carried the heaviest truth of all. That grief, when met with grace, becomes its own kind of strength. And sometimes, silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of meaning. They disappeared from the Rose Garden as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a single image that the world would never forget. Two parents, side by side, walking away from the noise into peace. In a world obsessed with noise, where every opinion demands a platform and every emotion becomes content, the story of Robert and Katherine Kirk stands apart. They didn't chase cameras, they didn't perform grief. They built something stronger than legacy. They built dignity. Their silence was not weakness, it was wisdom. It was the quiet defiance of two people who understood that pain does not need an audience to be real. While others shouted, they chose stillness. While the world speculated, they prayed. And in doing so, they reminded us of something powerful. That sometimes the loudest truth is the one left unsaid. Behind every public figure lies a private world. Behind every movement, a family that never asked to be part of the noise. And behind the legend of Charlie Kirk, there stand two figures who never stopped believing in peace, faith, and quiet strength. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Inside the Billionaires, and share your thoughts below. Because in the end, stories like this remind us of a truth we too often forget, that not all power is seen, not all voices are heard, and sometimes silence speaks the loudest of all.